that the amateur scene is really going to start to suffer then.
Interesting. And what do you mean by suffer for the amateur leagues?
The gap is going to get bigger because the one of the things that NA infrastructure does is everything's a secret in NA esports. Everything is like no one wants you to know these like basic concepts. Something that frustrates casters a lot. If you ever talk to casters, they really like even they ask analysts or whatever for like insight on how things are supposed to play out or how things are supposed to go, and teams are very hesitant to share anything like that. Like the example would be even something as simple as like bot lane matchups, like who's supposed to get shove wave one. Something that simple. A pro would be like every pro knows who the answer is, yet pros would be hesitant to share that information with anyone that's not a pro because they're afraid of their orgs replacing them. They don't want any chance of anyone getting better than them and taking their spot. And so because of that, you have rather than the better players developing the younger ones and like orgs having a pipeline that people can learn from, you have players trying to find information and then hoard it for themselves. And so as more and more coaches get into the scene, at the highest level, I think that since information already struggles to trickle down, it'll be even more noticeable when certain decisions are being made and everyone's trying to have to like piece together why they're doing it, as opposed to having actual help being told what to do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of podcasts on my channel. Today, I have two very special guests, one of which is JD, and the other is Colin, also known as Kapari. Kapari is a very highly ranked player, and JD is a very well-known coach in the amateur and collegiate scene. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask a little bit, some questions about about yourselves, and kind of get to know you guys better, and let the audience kind of understand exactly what your expertise is. Uh, Colin, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about your experience playing professionally or I guess as an amateur, and what exactly you've done and accomplished.
Okay, so I started playing League in like season three. I got out of Diamond for the first time at like the end of season five, beginning of season six. Um, I grew up knowing Saligo, EG's Academy mid laner. Him and I would play on a lot of teams together to compete for ranks. That was pretty fun. Through season six to this past current season, I've hit GM every single season except for season seven. I hit Challenger. I was top lane through all of those seasons until last season. So in 2021, I switched to mid lane so I could play at CSU because that's kind of the role they needed. And I figured having a friend that I've known my entire life and we kind of grew up as players together, be able to kind of coach me through the role and help me get good quickly kind of would help me. So I knew that was a role I could switch into. I've been playing on competitive teams since season five. What used to be back then that I played in, the first tournament I ever played in was in season five. It was the challenging or the qualifying circuit. So it's kind of what you see today with the scouting grounds qualifiers, except back then it was just like you're qualifying for the spot in the LCS. We made top 8 back then. Unfortunately, I had to be top 2 to get into LCS, but that's kind of as far as I ran back there. And then season 6, 7, and 8, I kind of just played on different amateur teams with a bunch of different lands. And then season 9, I played at CU Boulder. And then season 10, 11, and 12, kind of since then, I played partially, coached a little bit, and then this past season played at CSU.
Wow, it's actually quite the extensive history. I didn't actually know all that before even recording this. Uh, JD, tell us a little bit about yourself and your own experience.
Yeah, I started out as a player, obviously, like most people do. I played in a few different amateur leagues. I started playing League actually in season two. I made it all the way to silver, um, and then I hit diamond in I think season four, and then uh, and season five I quit playing League. I went to play Counter Strike a lot, so I had took a break from the game pretty much from season five to season six. I hardly touched the game. Um, season seven, season eight, I kind of came back and started playing in a couple different uh, little amateur things and uh, played in a couple different leagues. Played in a tournament against Colin actually before I actually knew him. At like 3 in the morning, we had to play our last match, and so we burger flipped it because no one wanted to play the whole best of three. But I kind of got bored of playing. I got kind of burnt out of it. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so one of my friends who was uh, coaching for her college asked me if I could come help out and just kind of talk to the players a little bit because they were having some issues with draft and things like that. So I said, why not? You know, I like the game. I'll look into it. And from there, I fell in love with coaching. Really liked that side of the game. Really enjoyed that aspect of it. And so I began to uh, look for different opportunities to do that. I was given an opportunity 2 years ago to start helping the University of Utah. Began to help with their collegiate program, and as I was helping there, I met uh, someone that CSU almost had at the school, Carson. I'm Carson OL. He is he was a player for CU Boulder. We played against him. I met him and became friends with him. Began to message with him some and kind of express some of the issues I was having at Utah. And as that was happening, he realized that CU didn't have a coach and they were starting to suffer because they didn't have someone that could kind of unify the team in that way. So we had mutual benefits from joining up. So I joined CU from Utah. When Carson graduated, I was actually going to quit coaching. I was kind of just moving on with my free time. It takes a lot of time to for me to do the job that I feel I need to do as a coach. It takes a lot of my time to do that, and so I was just gonna look to do other things. Carson then decided that he was going to look at potentially coming to CSU, and I did know Kopari at that point, Colin. So I knew a couple of the players, and I saw the roster on paper, and it looked quite good. So I thought I'd give it a shot. So this summer, we looked at a couple tournaments, and I got to know the guys and got to know the roster, and I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed their view of the game and just their personalities and stuff. And so it encouraged me to come back this year and coach. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been enjoying it a lot. Again, back into putting the hours in and things like that. But so right now I'm with CSU. I've had a couple talks with some amateur teams have asked me to come coach for them, but I'm not really interested in anything like that. And I've had a couple friends talk to me about some academy positions or whatever. But again, none of those are really what I probably want to do. I kind of enjoy it more as a side thing as opposed to my whole life. But that's kind of my story where I come from. I just enjoy it a lot and look forward to every chance I get to do
Wow. How many years would you say, like collectively, you've done coaching?
it. Coaching a little over 2 years.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Well, today's topic for the podcast is actually going to be about amateur and professional teams. Not necessarily specifically in North America, but obviously that's what you guys have the most experience with. So we'll probably be talking a lot about that, as well as kind of their infrastructure and how they're laid out and what it really means to be an amateur player or even a professional. So for my first question, I'd like to ask you guys, what do you think is the biggest difference between amateur play and actual professional play? Um, Colin, why don't we start with you?
Um, quite frankly, I think there's just not enough JDs in professional play. I'll just kind of put it that way. Simply put, I think it's just resource-wise from experience. I can personally say that over years of competitive play, I've had one other coach besides JD who I actually respected. That was a couple of years ago. We were probably the best amateur team in North America. Unfortunately, one of our players went to EU Masters and Saligo went to Academy, so that kind of dropped our team off the map, and then the org kind of disbanded after that because we all went our separate ways. So I kind of think that the biggest issue really between where amateur and I'm speaking specifically amateur because I'll get to my ideas for collegiate in a second. Between non-collegiate, so just amateur and actual pro play, is just players at the amateur level don't have the resources because obviously the coaches and the staff and the analysts at that point, there's a reason they're not professionals yet. Obviously, it's based off who you know to an extent, but some of them just don't make the cut, and then some of the players kind of aren't able to develop and hone in on what actually makes them a good player and what makes them unique to be able to be a professional because they just lack the intangibles that can be given to them from having a good coaching staff. Obviously, we see on the other side with collegiate, kind of goes hand in hand with amateur. We see a lot of collegiate runs over a lot of tournaments, specifically schools like Maryville and stuff. They do things like paying. So I think money also has a big aspect of when it comes to it. Is any amateur team I've seen, the pay is pretty garbage, to be honest, compared to like what a school can give you with a full ride scholarship and having actual. They bring on coaches that they paid for. They bring on analysts they paid for. They specifically pay people to fulfill positions that, honestly, just these smaller organizations that are trying to, just breed players cannot do yet.
Mm-hmm. And JD, would you agree with that sentiment, or do you think anything differently? Or
I would agree with it to an extent. I think that there's definitely a lack of development on that level. I know that one of the things a lot of people like to do, just in different circles, it became, I guess, when LS kind of got really popular, it became really popular to flame people's builds in game. And if you watch amateur, it's very clear that no one is telling these players like what's good. When you look at like some of the things they're doing, sometimes they're like 3 patches behind on builds and things like that. Because and when I was, looking around and reading around, one of the common sentiments was that most of the players are so focused on trying to get better to have a chance at you know getting their shot that they don't really they don't read, they don't do the brain work, and so there's no one to help them with those kind of things. Also, though, I think that a lot of amateur players have reached the extent of what they're capable of in the game. Um, just having talked to different ones and things like that, they have kind of found their peak in amateur, and so that's where they're always going to be. That's where they're comfortable being, and that's just kind of where they end up because a lot of players have this perception, I think, that they are almost pro level when they're not, um, and so I think that that too plays a part of it. That a lot of people get far in amateur, but simply can't make it to the next level. I'd use the example of like, it's not the best example because he technically did play in the pros, but a super dominant college basketball player. He played for UNC. His name was Tyler Hansborough. Very dominant college player. Really, really built for college, but as soon as he made it into the pros, he was a big man that wasn't big enough or strong enough, and he was never anything more than like a basic role player, right? He was a dominant player at lower levels of play, but when the competition got elevated just that little bit, he couldn't keep up, and it never was any kind of dominating force again. And I think that that's the reality check a lot of amateur players find is that the pros really are that much better than even the best.
yeah, I mean that makes sense. People all the time kind of hit that ceiling. I mean, even not in reference to actual professional play, like people just do that in solo queue naturally, and sometimes it's a bit of an ego check to find out exactly where you belong in that whole space. I am curious though. I heard you guys talking a little bit of shade about the coaching and kind of the infrastructure around amateur teams. What would either of you guys want to elaborate a little bit as to exactly what your thoughts are when it comes to the coaching scene?
I can chime in on this one, Colin. You can obviously follow up, but um, uh, uh, the reason I'm hesitant to say it's all down to coaching is because I've also talked to some of these established infrastructures. I've talked to, I'll leave the pro player nameless, but I talked to a pro player just about his own individual play because I was messaging him about his laning because I felt like he was sequencing out some of his early waves really bad on the champion he was playing, and I was just asking him about it. And I just asked him, I said, has any of your coaches at any of your points with any of these professional teams ever critiqued your micro? And he said, not once. Not one time had a professional player ever had a coach come to him and say, hey, I think that your sequencing of this is bad, or like could use work. They all just kind of talk in these big generalities and then try to follow after what the more successful teams, especially in the East, are doing. And when that's kind of the standard, you see a lot of issues with that. I will say on the flip side, though, there's also this well, there's been a big growth in it recently. I think NA especially is really investing into some of those talents and things like that. You look at teams like C9 that have just spent a lot of money, even with or without LS. They spent a lot of money getting a solid coaching staff that's high elo enough to actually contend with their players. Like Max Waldo was 1,000 LP on NA just playing Ornn and Gangplank for fun. Um, so you have like Max and Vigar V2 and people like that. But even like Golden Guardians has a Nero who is never like insane, but he's like a higher standard coach. Whereas in the past you've had these coaches that never even got to any kind of high level. Like there's coaches that can't get out of silver. And they're telling pro players how to play the game, and so I think that problem is starting to get fixed. But as it gets fixed on a pro level, obviously that I think will start to create an even bigger gap of what Colin was talking about earlier. Once the pro coaches are actually pro coaches, I think that the amateur scene is really going to start to suffer then.
Interesting. And what do you mean by suffer for the amateur leagues?
The gap is going to get bigger because the one of the things that NA infrastructure does is everything's a secret in NA esports. Everything is like no one wants you to know these like basic concepts. Something that frustrates casters a lot. If you ever talk to casters, they really like even they ask analysts or whatever for like insight on how things are supposed to play out or how things are supposed to go, and teams are very hesitant to share anything like that. Like the example would be even something as simple as like bot lane matchups, like who's supposed to get shove wave one, something that simple. A pro would be like every pro knows who the answer is, yet pros would be hesitant to share that information with anyone that's not a pro because they're afraid of their orgs replacing them. They don't want any chance of anyone getting better than them and taking their spot. And so because of that, you have rather than the better players developing the younger ones and like orgs having a pipeline that people can learn from, you have players trying to find information and then hoard it for themselves. And so as more and more coaches get into the scene, at the highest level, I think that since information already struggles to trickle down, it'll be even more noticeable when certain decisions are being made and everyone's trying to have to like piece together why they're doing it, as opposed to having actual help being told what to do.
Wow. Uh, I did not know that at all, and I obviously there's no way I would. But anyways, Colin, what do you think about that?
To kind of build on that, honestly, I think a big thing that people kind of struggle with, and we kind of see it a lot in LS coming to like C9, everyone was kind of freaking out for the correct reasons, but it shouldn't have happened. Kind of to the point where everyone's scared of innovation is kind of how it seems. Especially like JD brought up the East, kind of how they do things a little quicker over there, and just their infrastructure is kind of genuinely just better than what we can do on the Western front, it seems so far. For example, like champs like Tryndamere, or just, I mean, honestly, like Tryndamere, I mean, but it takes Eastern coach coming to North America to put Soraka on the radar of people, to put Ivern on the radar of these professional players that should have coaches that are kind of already telling them that these are good. Because, so for example, like TSM last year had their head coach being Bjergsen. That'd be amazing because I think there was a lot of people knew that Bjergsen played more solo queue than all of his teammates. I think almost combined. Like he played an insane amount of solo queue so he could test things out and help his teams develop in certain ways. Whereas, like JD brought up earlier, a bunch of these coaches are silver trying to tell people how to play. And it's like if you don't have a coach that can kind of go in and test things for you, because obviously the pros should try to hone in on what's good and keep doing that, and the coaches can be the ones to test things and kind of try to innovate. Whereas like we saw LS do that and everyone was pissed that LS was gone. Instead of everyone being mad that Ellis is gone, I think it would have been much better if everyone thought, why was everyone so happy he was here? It's because he made the game so different, and they saw success when he made the game different. So I think people are getting upset that he's gone and blaming C9 when instead they should be looking at themselves. Like these other orgs specifically, like players getting mad that C9's getting LS. Well, they could be spending the time tweeting, actually going and doing numbers and math and trying to actually find out that there are other good characters in the game that literally are just not being picked at all. Like a Lowy, for example, is a good strong character, especially for like an R5, or like even a B4 B5, just depending on what the enemy drafts. And it's just like no one's gonna try it, and then once someone does, you see something like Tryndamere where it's just everyone starts playing it because it just magically became OP, even though he wasn't touched for the past 5 patches. So it's kind of just lack of desire to innovate. And like we see this a lot in other things too. For example, like the Counter-Strike Global Offensive scene was dominated by Astralis for 2 years because they were the Eastern organization that was willing to try new styles. Stylistically, they practiced just even like things like throwing grenades at certain angles and getting sight takes like much more aggressively. Or we see in the NFL, we see like the Shanahan or McVay style of coaching kind of trickles down into other coaches. And people always say, "Oh, these coaches are going to be so great because they were coached by this person," but it's more of they were coached how to be better as a coach and how to innovate and how to practice these strategies, how to get better at running dominant styles that you're really good at and honing in on what you're good at while the coaches help you figure out more.
Gotcha. And like, out of curiosity, what do you guys think actually makes a coach like good? I know we've heard that word innovation get thrown around a lot, and being able to innovate and create successful strategies is awesome, and obviously going to be beneficial for a team. But how do you even get to that point as a coach? Like, how do you do the numbers and the math to figure something out like Soraka mid? Because in my opinion, from what I've been hearing from you guys, right, a lot of the issues when it comes to pro and amateur play is just people not really doing their homework. What type of homework do you guys think they should be doing? JD, how about you go first?
Okay. Um, so I think, well, to the initial question of what makes a coach good, I think that it's cool. It's all fine and good if you have a lot of good ideas or whatever. But I think that the most important aspect is that not just that you can, create an interesting framework through which the game can be viewed or whatever, but that you actually have the confidence and the communication skills to translate that or transfer that method of viewing the game to your players so that it's something that they can actually like tangibly work with. Like if I just tell Colin every day, like if I just message Colin every day and say a new champion's OP and the champions have nothing in agreement with each other, um, there's nothing that I can accomplish with that because he doesn't know, like he doesn't know how I view the game or anything like that. But there'll be plenty of times where Colin will message me or I'll message Colin about champions, and when we talk about champions being good, we agree on what makes a champion good or like what makes a scenario good, and so it's a lot easier for us to have that discussion because we've already discussed, the framework through which we view the game. And so when you're coaching, it's not just the ability to find the OP thing or whatever, but it's the ability to instill confidence in your players that your framework or your ideas work and that they can interact with them in a specific kind of way. I think the easiest way to do this is obviously if you're skilled enough to compete with them. That's why I think C9's coaching staff was having the easiest time with it, because it was one thing to tell, it's one thing for LS to say Ivern mid is really good. It's another thing for LS to load into game as Ivern mid and play against an academy or LCS level player and demonstrate how to win the lane. Um, and so he had that method, but however that communication happens, that's obviously the simplest way to do it. But that's what goes into good coaching. But you also have to kind of make a differentiation, right? Because there are strategic coaches and then there are head coaches. Strategic coaches are there specifically to explain the game and build the game, whereas head coaches are there as kind of everything, right? They're an all-encompassing thing. They're there to solve problems, solve disputes. If a player messages me and says, we keep doing this in game, I feel like this player doesn't respect me, or I feel like this player is always messing up, the head coach has to put out that fire. Whereas strategic coaches just get to hone in on the specifics. So it's not just it's not that simple. An amateur has none of that. Amateur often has one coach. So for instance, I'm the only coach for CSU. So I have to be a head coach, but I also have to have the knowledge of a strategic coach and try to fit all that into the players' heads. Whereas, a pro, in theory, has a coach that's dedicated to their role. They have coaches dedicated to strategy, and then they have a head coach dedicated to like player relations. So you have different, again, um, different hats that people have to wear that all kind of play into what makes a good coach. I think it's going to be a little bit different for each one of those things. As for your question about homework and kind of how to do your homework, honestly, one of the things I encourage people to do is literally just read the League of Legends wiki. I have found that in my time coaching people or watching people or talking to people, most people don't actually know what at least half the champions in the game really do. They've played against them once or twice, but they don't actually know like what the mechanics of the champion are. Um, and that's so they have no way to evaluate the actual strength of that character because they don't actually know what it does. If a thought experiment I like to do, even just with myself, is uh, using Hegel's dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic, which is basically bringing an idea, comparing it to another idea, a thesis and antithesis, and figuring out, okay, what's actually good about this champion, what's fake about this champion, and can the good sides of it legitimately play out in a normal circumstance. Um, so, for instance, there are a couple picks right now that I have talked with Colin, with a couple other people in the scene about that have not been picked anywhere. Except I think last week one of them finally did get picked. Top lane, I think it was Mordekaiser top, finally got picked in I think LPL. But I've been looking at the ups and downsides of those champions and seeing the patterns in play from other people and saying Mordekaiser fits this gap that is left open by how people are playing the game, and so let's try it. Let's figure it out. Um, the thing that gets frustrating for me is most people use the monkey like on Twitter. Twitter is like the monkey and typewriter approach, where people literally just start Mad Lib style listing out champions and saying this champ's good here, this champ's good here. With all the recent tier lists that have been going around on Twitter, it looks like that's what's happening. People are just sitting down and thinking, what hot take can I make to make this champion good? Um, so you have some of that going on with people, and you just have to kind of try to ignore that. But if you're making honest, assumptions about champions and making honest looks into the meta, you realize very quickly that you can accomplish a lot with a lot of different champions, as long as you are again figuring out what their genuine upsides are and how to emphasize those. And I think that that's what mostly goes into theory crafting, and something Colin and I both do probably too much of, but something we both do a lot of.
So, Colin, do you, one, agree with what JD was just talking about? But two, I wanted to follow up and actually ask you another question on top of that, which is, what do you think a coach has to do in order to gain players' respects on teams?
So okay, so I'll start by responding to basically.
Yes.
I agree with everything JD just said, like to a T. So the only thing I'm going to add on like the homework and the kind of things that have to happen there are just from the player's point of view, because his is a perfect example from the coach's point of view and then partially from the players. The only thing that I would add to that is I don't think a lot of players really watch a VOD or like a recent game of a professional player or a stream of just someone who's good at a character and identify, like, they don't look for the right things. Like, I think they just watch it. They watch from start to finish and they say, nice, I watched 3 VODs today. Well, what did you actually gain? It's like, I know how to play this matchup. So they probably don't. They probably know how to play that matchup versus the enemy player if they do all the exact same movements. So it's kind of looking for specifics. Like on this wave timer versus this champ, with like a jungle matchup being kind of how it is, like what kind of movements do they make, or like literally the most plain example that we see consistently, and I know LS hates this more than anything, and I'm definitely have become not a fan of it after actually thinking about it and actually doing like research on it, is the rune biscuit delivery. A lot of mages and a lot of just players in general take biscuits or cookies just for the most pointless reason. And the other 2 runes in that tree are Futures Market and Minion Dematerializer. If you think of every wave in League, because it kind of is, it's not just an FPS, it is a strategy game. If you think of it as like a move in chess or a strategy move, then having the ability to use Dematerializer to push in a wave an extra faster so you can get the first move your next piece quicker is just better. Or having Futures Market where you can hit a spike, like an item spike for a key fight that the other person couldn't hit, or you get pushed because you can get Blue Book on a mage where they couldn't because they have 3 cookies sitting in their inventory since 6 minutes in. It's just kind of, people don't actually look and analyze these things and think, why do they work? They just watch it and say, they did that, that must be good. But a lot of pros just don't actually think about it. And then to the next point, going back to also what JD said, where it feels you have to have the communication skills to kind of own a room. it's kind of I think the role of any coach. So for example, like I've respected, like I said, I've respected one coach on one amateur league team, and JT. I've like none of my any of my other league coaches, football coaches, baseball coaches, cross country coaches. No one has really garnered my respect very much, just because they don't actually know exactly what they're talking about. But if someone can come in and prove to me they know what they're talking about, why they know what they're talking about, that's instantly like perfect gratification to, okay, I can now listen to everything you say with full confidence and take all of it into account and at least consider it. Because I'm not going to lie, a lot of times, which wasn't the great mindset for a long time, I literally would just ignore a lot of what coaches said because my first few coaches were just not in nice terms. They weren't all there in the head. Like when it came to actually thinking about league correctly, they kind of blurted things out that they saw on Twitter. Like JD was saying, oh, the tier list or something. They're like, I need you to try this because this person tweeted it's S plus plus 777 tier, and so it has to be good. As opposed to where JD is like, have you seen these numbers in this scenario? And I think because of these numbers in this scenario, this is worth giving a shot. What do you think? And then actually asking for that feedback from the exact same point of view. Because I think JD and I talk about a lot. And so in my opinion, red 5th pick is probably the strongest pick in the entire game. So a lot of people would say it's like blue 1 because you can pick the OP champ. But literally, the R5 pick can counter the entire enemy team. You've seen everything that's been drafted. You've seen your entire like team comp. That is the key perfect piece. That is the final. That is the checkmate pick when it comes to league. That is like what can determine and swift and change an entire game. And it's like things like that people don't actually think about. They just pick a character because they think, oh, I like this champ. It's good against my lane opponent. But then it gets crushed by the support and jungle. If the enemy support jungle is stronger, they can just destroy wherever lane they're playing from. So it's like they don't actually think analytically enough to the point that some coaches should and do. And like JD said, when you get to the professional level, it's like it is devoting your whole life to it. And a lot of coaches just like doing it as a hobby. But I feel like just with a player watching a VOD, it's the same as a coach analyzing a situation. Rather than going through the monkey typewriter Twitter and seeing tier lists and thinking things are good, take that 5 minutes, go into the perfect tool that Riot gave us to test, go into practice tool and just test numbers on waves on a target dummy, see how things work, and just think, can I tell my players this is good? What reasoning do I have? And then kind of, and this though, you don't have to think about, like, you don't have to be playing the game or anything to think about this next part. Just think, okay, what possible things can they tell me no for, or what possible questions could they have, and how can I answer those? Like, you can come up with those whenever you want. You can be eating dinner and come up with a couple questions. Like, I've had that with JD. I'll just sit down on my table eating dinner, and I'll message him, or I'll message some of my other friends and just be like, couldn't this be good? Like, why is it good? Have you tried this? Have you considered this? Have you seen this in your scrims? Something like that. So it's kind of just taking the initiative as to good practice, for example, versus not good practice, just effective practice is, I think, the most important thing for coaches and players.
Gotcha. And to follow up on some of what you were saying, I actually have a question for JD here. JD, do you think that there's any place for people in terms of not necessarily coaching, but even like the infrastructure of a team who aren't at the same level as the teammates? So do you think anyone pretty much below Masters Plus should really ever be in a position to tell one of these other players what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so first of all, I think head coaching, you have to throw a lot of that out the window, because depending on the team infrastructure, right, the head coach could be much more of a player manager as opposed to a strategic force. So in a lot of these cases, the head coach is more of a motivator, more of an encourager, and things like that. And so I think there are places for it, absolutely. I think that in the strategic roles, you don't. I don't think a coach has to be actively master tier, or actively that high elo. And it's hard to put a number on just how high elo someone can be because obviously there are people that can have really good ideas, but have really poor execution. But I do think, for instance, a challenger coach named Wolverine, he managed to hit Diamond playing Malphite and Udyr, Malphite top and Udyr jungle, with one hand. He only clicked his abilities. He didn't. He point and clicked all his abilities with one hand. The only hotkeys he used were for F keys. He bound them to his mouse buttons. He didn't. He clicked to level up, clicked to cast all his spells, clicked to use health potions, all that kind of stuff. He hit diamond and was like winning lanes, at times stomping lanes as Malphite with one hand. And the intention of the thought experiment was, if you truly understand how the game functions, it doesn't matter what is happening here. I literally did this with one hand. Um, and, I hit diamond with one hand, and you're telling me that you are a professional coach that possess an incredible amount of game knowledge, and you can't get out of gold, right? That's kind of the discrepancy there. So it's hard to put an actual rank on it. I would definitely say if you cannot dedicate time and achieve diamond in the game, like you don't have the skill necessary to do that, that's a problem. And probably again, if you're at the professional level getting paid to do it, thousands and thousands of dollars, it's probably you should be able to hit master tier. But again, I don't think you have to actively hold that rank. I think that your time should be spent in other ways once you have the position. But you should at least have the skills necessary to hit that in the strategic positions. Whereas again, when you're in more of a discussion facilitating position, I think it's not as important. A head coach still needs to have a working understanding of all the the tenets of the game. Because for instance, if my AD carry comes to me and is complaining to me about my jungler, I need to understand game mechanics enough to know, first of all, are the complaints valid? Is the jungler messing up? Is the AD messing up? Are we as a team not enabling the jungler to do what he needs to do? Things like that. I need to be able to understand that, and any head coach needs to be able to understand that if they're truly going to facilitate good discussion. So I think there's some expectation, again, of some level of personal mastery of the game. But I also think that right now, the problem with with a lot of the scene isn't so much that people aren't, because the reality is every pro team now has at least someone in their coaching staff that is high elo. As far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any pro team that is without these high level players in their staff. The biggest, so that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is kind of the things Colin was talking about, that it's kind of shifted the other way in some cases where someone has hit high elo, and so now we assume that their ideas about the game are valid, when in reality, they may be doing things that they don't know how to communicate to someone else or whatever, and so you have kind of the back and forth of those things. But no, I absolutely don't think that it's impossible for these people to be in roles where they're helpful. I think that there could even be exceptions to the standards I just said. But I think on average, you should expect any strategic coach to be a Masters Plus capable player, and any head coach to at least be able to hit, at least have enough understanding of the game to hit some kind of plat or diamond rank. But again, the head coach focus, in my opinion, would be more of the personality and the leadership qualities more than the gameplay qualities.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me too. I mean, obviously there will always be exceptions, and I actually really like the breakdown that you just gave of kind of that whole dynamic. It's really interesting. But Colin, I'm curious. Would you respect a coach at all if or even do you think they would be able to gain your respect if they weren't able to at least hit uh diamond, I guess?
Honestly, yes, because like JD said, there are coaches. Like every coach has a different role, right? There are different kinds of roles as coaches through teams. And when you get to like amateur, also like JD said, like a lot of them just have like one coach. Like he's the only coach for CSU. A lot of them kind of only have one coach. There's just kind of the run around. Usually the other coach is like a sixth player on the roster that's a sub, and he just can coach at the same time. I think it doesn't. I mean, rank obviously does help solidify a coach's backing when they're coming to you with information or for the first time saying, all right, like if a coach came to me and said, like, I hit 1K LP, I'm your coach now. It's like, okay, I would respect him a little more. Like it would definitely help with the background, but it depends on, I kind of take a lot at face value as what they say. So if someone's insanely good at just studying numbers, focusing on numbers, and understanding situations perfectly, and just understanding the core strategy of the game, then it's like, yeah, I would take a lot of what they say just as I would someone who's 1,000 LP, or just someone who is like sitting like plat 1 right now. just because it's the difference of it's the importance of what they say. So if someone actually comes to me and tells me why something's good, and they push and they argue on it, and they say like it is good and here is why, and like okay, so this is a perfect example actually of this is something JD did last semester. He gave, besides to me, he gave roles to everyone. Kind of, you have to play 10 games of this champion in solo queue, and that's like a perfect way to kind of tell a player, like, at least get the argument out to a player that a champion is good, and at least try it before you tell me no. And that way, it doesn't take much out of the player's time because they're still playing solo queue. They're working on, whether it's jungle pathing, whether it's laning, whether it's wave management, whether it's like roam timers. They're still working on core fundamentals, but they're just trying it on a different champion and seeing if it's good. So having those laps of running it on different characters, it doesn't really, I don't think, doesn't take a high ranking coach to be able to determine what can be good. It's just the way it's more important to me how they implement it. So like I said, for the running 10 games of a specific champ because he thinks it's good is a perfect reason for me. I think a silver coach could say that. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't love it if my coach was silver, but a silver coach could say that, give me some numbers and say, I think this is good, this is why you should try it, and I'll try it, and if it sucks, then at least I know it sucks. But it's like, at least they gained my respect because they told me it's good, they told me why, and they told me to at least try it a little bit.
Gotcha. One of the kind of questions that I had written out before we kind of got on this show was asking a little bit about North America being the region that it is and kind of having a reputation for being poor. Do you guys think that that's a skill thing between players here in North America, or do you think that's just a systemic issue with competitive teams and not understanding exactly how to get their players to play at the next level?
I think that I think that if you honestly are evaluating Chinese, Korean, and American games, and you could throw Europe in there, whatever. It's very clear that we are just worse at the game. Like objectively, our players are just worse at playing the game in terms of clicking, and like their movements are worse, their inputs are worse. They are just worse on a mechanical level than these other players. However, the West is kind of one of the things the West is doing slowly is actually starting to bridge the gap by trying to outthink these other teams. I think we saw this a lot in group stages at Worlds this past year, where China came in with one of the worst meta reads I've ever seen, and China almost got completely eliminated from Worlds, like across the board because their meta read was so abysmal. But then EDG like came in, EDG had enough of a bot laner to figure out that hey, we can pick enchanters, and so they had enough of a time. They had enough time to pivot and actually get a better read of the meta and win. But you watch a team like FPX come in and just completely drop the ball, completely fail. They were slamming stuff like Kai'Sa still, and Worlds when Kai'Sa was just getting obliterated every time she got picked. And so you saw this really for the first time the West looked like they were convincing the East what to do. But even with that, Korea seemed to be a lot quicker to move than China, and so Korea is now you have this kind of interesting breakdown where Korea is kind of getting closer back to embracing these more I guess slow is a word you could use, but embracing these more controlled styles where we saw them kind of break from that. When Damwon rose to prominence, a lot of people joked that they were a Chinese Korean team because Damwon did a lot of side laning and they like pushed, Noguri and Showmaker pushed leads really hard, and they would just completely choke out teams and then end the game after one team fight, which is very much Chinese in execution, whereas Koreans would edge little advantages here and there and just try to like slowly whittle the opponent down, and you'd have like a 3-2 game at 45 minutes, and I'd have fallen asleep at the end of it. And so when Damwon kind of got knocked down a little bit, and is knocked down a little bit this year, you see a lot more of T1 just controlling every avenue of the game. If you watch T1 games, even when they lose early, the amount of control they exert just in their macro and in their decision making is kind of unmatched. So I think you're seeing the pendulum swing a little bit. I think last year the West kind of caught the East off guard with some of our ideas a little bit, but I think the East adjusted really quickly. The other problem with that, I guess, is that you have to establish, what is truly right or truly wrong in competitive league. This is something, Colin and I talk about a lot with China. Uh, you really do have to ask yourself why they're doing the things they do, because some of the pros have some insane reasons for like some of the stuff they do and some of the crazy things they do. I mean, most recently, that clip on Reddit has been surfacing of Doinby killing Showmaker 3 times, like in what is it, in 9 minutes or something, or like 5 minutes or whatever. Um, and one of the kills, I was joking with Colin. Doinby says, "Oh, he cast E. I think he's dead now," and he's like almost full HP right next to his turret. And I was just talking to Colin. I'm like, he has such an understanding of what he's capable of on that champion that he knows that Akali's dead, and I have no idea that Akali's dead. And when that level of understanding is there, right? Am I going to say that he's not smart at the game because he built Rise wrong, but he knows that Rise is lethal on Akali at level 5 is there if she casts her E wrong? Like, obviously that's more than just mechanical ability, right? That's understanding. And so even breaking down what knowledge of the game is, right? Because understanding a matchup versus understanding item math is two very, very, very different things when it comes to player intelligence and knowledge. So I think that we're still behind in that level of knowledge in terms of how to play out matchups and things like that. And obviously we don't know how to push, NA hasn't found a side lane this season in LCS. I don't think, maybe once. I've watched a team. I think CLG actually played through side pretty decently against C9 when they beat them. But so when you have this, on some of these fundamental gameplay issues, I think we're still behind from both a knowledge and gameplay department. Um, but I don't think it's all. I don't think it's all infrastructural. I think some of it's just cultural, where it's more valid for a Korean to tell their parent, "Hey, I want to be like Faker," because their parent already knows who Faker is, and is willing to accept that route in the same way that, like, if a parent, I mean, I coach high school, or I teach high school, and there are several kids that are like devoting and moving their lives around to try to play basketball, and their parents are totally down for it. And that's a lot more common, even though it's really stupid. That's a lot more common than, if a kid said, "Hey, I want to be a pro league player," their parents would say, "Okay, well, you can play games on your own time, but that's not your life. That's not a job. Get something else done." So I think that our culture plays a part into it as well.
And Colin, would you agree with kind of that sentiment of, like, culture being such a huge impact on why maybe North American players aren't as talented as some of the other regions out there? Or do you think there's more to it?
I think there's a little more to it. So I do actually completely agree. Like, especially for amateur players or anyone trying to come up in the scene, it's going to be hard. Like, with your parents or your friends saying, like, that's not you can't achieve that. Why even try? Like, don't do that. Go to school, finish your, go to college, finish your degree, stuff like that. And I think it's kind of helped too, having these colleges paying for players to come to their school. I think that kind of also helps break that a little bit, because they can say, "I'm going to school to play video games," but it's paid for. So their mom and dad are like, "Okay, well, as long as you're going to school." But I think a big thing with current standing pros is, like JD said, I think we definitely caught the East off guard for when it came to Worlds last year, and MSI, honestly, just international tournaments in general. However, I think it's how we practice is really bad, because, like, if you look at our pro players and the amount of solo queue games they play, which is like, that's how you hone in on a champ, that's how you get better, that's how you learn, is like, we just, like, no one plays solo queue. And then a lot of the people, which I think this is actually a different part of just our culture in the United States, is a lot of people like to, it's so much easier to blame than it is to actually like just put the blame on yourself, practice, learn, kind of have this repetition down. It's much easier to blame, "Oh, my ping's so bad I can't practice efficiently at all. My solo queue teammates, like, my solo queue is such bad experience that it just sucks." And, like, this Champions queue came out, right? This helped a lot of players. This moved ping lower in professional areas. But once they start allowing more of these players to come in to Champions queue, like, that are just from solo queue, I would really not be surprised if it got to the point where a lot of pro players or academy players or just streamers or something, I'm just like, I'm not playing Champions queue anymore because I'm just getting unlucky rolls with my teammates. Like, my team just sucks. I'm getting amateur randoms and they're getting the entire stack of Team Liquid. Like, it's just not fun. It's not fair practice. So I think everyone kind of always has something to blame for why they can't do and find the success that the East can. Um, and it's going to keep like until that cycle breaks. And I mean, there are obviously some players, I think like, they're basically all imports almost at this point, that like really climb the solo queue leaderboards. They play a ton. They practice their champs. They hone on these mechanics. They know that if someone uses E, that they can solo kill them under turret, even though they're full HP. Like it's just practicing these things in solo queue or finding a way to practice them. Even 1v1s. Like I've talked to a couple players that are in academy or even professionals that they say like a lot of their teammates don't run 1v1s. They don't run 2v2s bot lane. They don't practice these things that are like really core fundamentals. Like they'll do it for an ego flex, like a top laner will shit on his mid laner and Aurelia mid 1v1, and just that's their 1v1. But that's just like they're not actually doing it for the sake of practicing or learning anything. They're just doing it to get their hands warm and actually say like, oh, I'm better. But and staying on that kind of culture track, I do agree with like what JD said, where in Korea say I want to be like Faker. I remember seeing something. It was right after Worlds in season 5, so like the beginning of season 6. There was some post that was just north of 70% of all billboards in Korea had Faker's face on them, which is like that's insane. Like every time you see a billboard, like almost 3 and 4 billboards are going to have Faker's face on it. Like, of course, that's something where an entire community, an entire country can say, we're okay if our kids want to look up and be like that person. Unfortunately, all of our billboards, because billboards are like 1900s, it's just, you know, law commercials and weird like phone sex lines and stuff. But like when it comes to culture, we don't seem to be able to be optimistic and open-minded. So just like with our practice, we always seem to blame something, and then when it comes to culture, we always seem to think that something is better than everything else. Like there's always something else to strive for. It's like, oh, I want to do this as a career. Well, you can be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you could be a professional sports player. Like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to like be a manager of a Chick-fil-A your whole life? It's like some people just they have like these goals, and it's just like it's what they want to do. And our society finds it so hard to accept that people that have goals aren't the goals that make you millions of dollars every year or put you in the spotlight of everyone else. They're goals that make someone happy in what they want to do. And it just seems like while we do say, just as the United States, kind of like the American dream kind of thing, and we can do whatever, I feel like a lot of people don't because they're scared of getting judged, of doing what's wrong in the eyes of all their peers and their family.
Gotcha. And just to kind of let you guys know, we have about, I want to say like maybe 10, 15 minutes left in the podcast. So I'm going to start to move away a little bit from culture and a little bit back to competitive teams and such like that. So my next question for you, JD, is going to be, Colin talked a little bit about how a lot of these teams are practicing, but they're going about it the wrong way. In your opinion, what do you think is the right way for a competitive professional team to practice?
I think I mean my answer would be pretty much what C9 just implemented. I think is kind of what I would always kind of advocate for, which is a lot of internal scrims, so that they can run stuff back really quickly, like run different scenarios. You can LS talks a lot about blitz scrims. They're very useful when you have two capable rosters. You can simulate certain scenarios in a game and really quickly get back to them over and over and over, like really fast. So doing things like that to maximize efficiency, and then obviously Colin mentioned 1v1s and things like that. Being able to figure out matchup dynamics that way. That was one of the things with Damwon is you have Showmaker playing on a team with Noguri, which has to be the best 2 people to have on a team to practice any solo lane matchup possible, because both of them can play whatever at the highest level, and so definitely like those kind of 1v1s. But again, picking not like ego Aurelia 1v1s like Colin said, but these 1v1s where you're really like honing in on specific mechanics or dynamics of the matchup and saying, okay, I want to figure out, what are the limits I can push with this, and figuring out even to jump way back to like the discussion of biscuits, even figuring out like what advantage can I get from biscuits in this lane in this 1v1, because I've played it enough to know that like I can now shove out on this wave, or I can now, contest these minions because I have this advantage, or scorch, or area, or whatever, optimizing those things. When you play at a professional level, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask you to put that level of work in. I think it's Doinby who said that he used to have to put 20 to 30 games to learn a champion when he was younger, and now he's getting old, and it's taking him 40 games to learn a champion, or to get comfortable picking a champion on stage again. And if someone who's played as much League as him still has to put in 40 solo queue games on a champion, which is more than some players put in on like even their quote unquote main champions that play professionally. If he's willing to do that just on a whim, you know, we should be we should be willing to, certainly at the very least, put in 1v1 in internal practice, um, so that we can kind of find those results. But yeah, I think if you really just look at C9's coaching approach, I think that would be, I don't have all the answers obviously, but I think from what I understand and know about people and things like that, I would say that their most recent approach would be probably the standard that a lot of teams should shoot for.
Huh. Yeah, I think that's really really cool. Actually, I don't really follow a lot of pro stuff, so a lot of these questions that I'm asking you guys is more of just like me kind of trying to catch a glimpse into what you guys think about all this, because I know you are both so knowledgeable in this area, and it's really cool to kind of hear all these different things than what I normally do hear from places like Twitter and from even like the analyst desk and such. But moving forward, I guess with my next question, uh, Colin, what do you think is the most beneficial thing you've done as a player to get better?
Um,
I guess more from like a coaching perspective. Like, what has someone taught you? I guess because I do want to stay on topic with kind of the whole theme.
right,
I guess, but
right. So I actually, so part of me wants to say, like I said, like actual having good practice. Um, and so that includes like watching VODs, like I said earlier, like going way back, like watching VODs with a purpose, like knowing why you're doing something is kind of one of the things. But honestly, I think, and obviously, I this unfortunately goes back to what I was just talking about. But the main sum of it is like learning to be okay with critiquing the crap out of myself, like actually just saying like breaking down everything, kind of restarting from scratch, and like because this is kind of what actually pushed me, as much of a joke as it sounds, out of gold for the first time. Was Saligo would tell me consistently like you gotta blame yourself a ton, break down your play, like start from scratch and just build yourself back up, like with different fundamentals, in order to understand the game and shine an entirely new light on everything that's happening, and really redefine how you're playing and why you're playing that way. And I think that kind of pushed me to like extremely new heights, because I would consistently, instead of obviously like blaming teammates is like an easy thing, but I just consistently break down my own play and kind of understand, like, and this was before I understood the numbers or anything of the game, or actually like the analytics, was just understanding what I'm doing wrong and try to figure out what I can do differently, rather than just like brute force smashing, playing a champion over and over and over and over and over, which obviously like it can be good, like JD said, like running those reps can be good, but it's just I think the core value of really like breaking down how you believe the game should be played, and just forgetting all of that and coming back in from a million different new angles.
interesting. And by the way, we're just about out of time here, so I'm gonna ask one last question to JD, and kind of get like a summarization of our thoughts throughout this whole podcast. But JD, I'm curious if you could implement anything into, I guess, North American professional play, like a standard that people would go to. What would it be?
Um, if I could implement anything, so are you talking about like
Like if you could,
culturally,
yeah,
or what?
culturally, sure. Like something that you could, like if you could change the culture of North American professional play, what would you have changed?
I think that the number one thing that I would like to see, and it sounds kind of dumb, and there's no actual way to implement it, but a player should have to be able to defend all of their decisions to me without, and obviously, to me or to whoever, right? A player should have to be able to defend why they're doing what they're doing without any reference to anyone else. In other words, if people would learn to stop watching other people and saying, "Oh, well, they did this, so I'm going to do it," or whatever, if people would actually develop their own framework from which they view the game, I think that that would be the biggest thing I would change. People clown him a lot. He posts a lot of crazy stuff on Twitter, but like RJS, for instance, has, again, some wild opinions, but he's someone who truly is building his own framework for understanding the game. And you can see that in all his opinions. They all line up. They're all consistent because he actually has a method from which he's viewing the game that isn't just this person said this, so now I think it's good. And so if that mentality permeated the culture, I think you would see a lot of growth and a lot of interesting developments outside of, the same 15 champions being locked in every game in LCS, just with different teams picking them.
Wow. Guys, I can't thank you guys enough for coming on and discussing this subject matter with me. You guys are both, in my opinion, experts in this stuff. So I really got to learn a lot, and I hope the people who are listening also got to learn a lot. But I think for now we're going to start to wrap it up. Thank you guys again for coming on. You guys were absolutely wonderful guests. Couldn't be happier. So thank you for anyone who watched and listened, and I hope to see you guys back on here sometime soon to maybe talk about something else. So
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It was interesting to hear some of JD's thoughts too. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
look at him differently now. Disappointed, man.
Great. Well, thank you all again, and have a good rest of your day.